It's others that tend to bring up of course, did you brake test Schumacher and all the good stuff that people want to know. And depending on the mood, I either say, yes, I did, or no, I didn't.
The tables are all full. The people that I've been working with all day, who I still didn't really know, were on a full table. So I sat on a table on my own and I waited there for a few minutes and one person came over to sit with me and it was you. Hi, I'm Marc Priestley. I spent almost a decade at the McLaren Formula One team alongside inspirational people such as Kimi Raikkonen, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, but also people like Adrian Newey and Ron Dennis. I created the Pitlane Life Lessons Podcast to share many of those things that I've learnt with you to help you to think about the challenges in your life a little bit more like a Formula One team might think about them. Enjoy. Well, today's guest doesn't really need an introduction. It's David Coulthard, former Grand Prix driver with 13 career victories, but he's also a teammate of mine. I learnt an awful lot from working with him back at McLaren in the day, and you will learn a lot from him today too. He talks about the things that he discovered on his journey through Formula One, but also particularly a moment where he nearly lost his life. Not in a racing car, but in a small plane crash that killed two pilots sitting just a couple of metres away from him. It changed everything about the way that he thought, and he fed that into his career back then as a driver, which he still carries forward today. You will not want to miss any of this. Welcome back to Pitlane Life Lessons. DC, thank you so much for joining me. It's a real pleasure. You are, of course, a former teammate of mine at McLaren all those years ago. A 15-year career in Formula One. I'm really interested to talk about a lot of that, but also the really interesting career that you've had since in the business world. So let's start by going back to your Formula One days. 13 career victories in those cars. How do you reflect on that as a section of your life?
Well, not as often as people might imagine, and given that obviously I still work within the sport, but I don't tend to reflect on myself as a ex-F1 driver unless it's brought up. You know, for example, I was in Milan at the weekend, and of course Formula One came up in conversation, and I was, thinking about Hamilton at Ferrari, and I'm thinking about, Jack Doohan getting his chance, and all the things that are kind of relevant to the here and now. And then it's others that tend to bring up of course, did you brake test Schumacher and all the good stuff that people want to know. And depending on the mood, I either say, yes, I did, or no, I didn't. So of course, it's a huge part of my life. And as I sit here in my office with the backboard of my helmet design, I'm surrounded by photographs and memories from my career. And I think that's partly because I've never did that at home. So, my apartment, I've lived in Monaco since 95. There's nothing really that would suggest that it's an ex-racer that lives there. I think maybe lucky that a lot of my early stuff, a lot of stuff from my career, we have a little museum up in Scotland, which sounds a bit wanky, but the thing is, my dad was a big fan of motor racing. So when I grew up, he sponsored guys in karting. He had a 308E Hesketh in what was an old sugar store, and I used to go and sit in it as a kid. I think he swapped it for a pair of Purdy's guns. So there was always kind of motor racing memorabilia around, but I think we've always kept it in a space. So, my trophies and helmets and all that sort of stuff are up in the museum. So long answer to say, I don't really reflect on it unless somebody asks me a question. So you've asked me the question. I'm very lucky. I grew up in a village. Dad liked racing. That got me into racing. I moved to cars at the right time, even though I had no interest in moving to cars. I was a reluctant guy going into it. Formula Ford felt bizarre. Like, you're used to having worked on some of the, most, like NASA style, space built for the space race Formula One cars. Formula Ford was pretty basic. So it felt horrible in comparison to a kart. But I reluctantly went into cars and won both the championships, got signed by Jackie to go to Paul Stewart Racing, did well, got signed by Frank to be a Williams test driver, did well. Sadly, Roland and Ayrton lost their lives, as we all remember, in Imola, and then suddenly I'm a Grand Prix driver.
Yeah. Well, I'll come on to that in a moment, but how do you look back at the level of success that you had? I mean, do you think of it as sort of overachieving, underachieving, somewhere in the middle? 13 career wins, that's a pretty special accolade to have. But equally, I guess you never won a championship. So how do you look at that whole, that time in terms of success?
Well, I think I underachieved given my basic skills. I don't put myself at all in any day, in any dream, in the same category as the greats, those who win multiple world championships. But I think that number could have been higher. You lived through the McLaren years where I was encouraged to move over, otherwise instructed to move over on a couple of occasions. Yeah. One that was, Melbourne 98 was pre-discussed, so in many ways easier to handle. Although I think on reflection, Ron probably wishes we didn't do that because it was in a time when team orders weren't allowed. It was, in the early days of sports betting. There was a lot of disappointed people in that. When I was at Williams, I moved over from Damon a couple of times, and then again with Mika and Jerez 97, which was that controversial Michael and Jacques crashing. Frank and Ron had agreed basically that Frank would not get in the way of Ron getting a victory, providing McLaren didn't get in the way of Williams' battle with Schumacher. All great stuff, probably chargeable if anyone had been around at the time. Yeah. One vital piece of information missing, they didn't tell Mika or myself. So we went into the Grand Prix clueless as to what had been agreed. And then, I haggled for 30 laps not to have to move, and then eventually moved over. So I think I could have achieved more, not just because of those scenarios, but I think I was just so naive. I don't want to overplay the village boy thing because I think I've definitely developed into life, but it was a hobby. It was never kind of, I took it seriously. Don't get me wrong. I think the reason I stayed at McLaren for 9 years is not because, as you recall, I was winning every weekend or every championship, but I was a loyal servant to the team. I turned up and did the testing. I did my best. You could rely on me to be there at 9 a.m. I could do the 100 laps a day or whatever was required. I wasn't one of the lazy talents that could spring to your tongue that I won't mention, who had the talent but didn't really make the effort. So I just wasn't worldly. And therefore, when I lost, or we all lost, Gilles de Ferran just over a year ago, I reflected in eulogy that I learned more from Gilles, I think, than any other man, because he took me from being a boy from a village. We became teammates in 1990, and he was 2-3 years older than me, and he was a man from Brazil. He fought his way off the streets of Sao Paulo and came to the UK to race in Formula Ford, made a way for himself. He was just so much more experienced in life, and as teammates, as people who shared a room and spent a lot of time and became lifelong friends, I learned so much in my early career that still, if you're coming from behind the curve, you're kind of always behind the curve. It's quite difficult to get on it. But a summary of my career, no regrets given the opportunities I was given or the information I had available to me at the time.
Yeah, which is all you can go on at the time, exactly. You just touched on there, Gilles de Ferran and the sad passing. Your career, actually, since you got into motorsport especially, and even before that, but your career has been littered with kind of tragedy in lots of ways. Lots of people, as you mentioned earlier on, your big break in Formula One literally came at the hands of a real tragedy when Ayrton was sadly lost. So have any of these major tragedies, whether it's the drivers that you've lost, the friends, even family members, and I know you were in a plane crash as well where the two pilots sadly lost their lives. What have these major tragedies taught you in life that you've been able to take some positive from, that's able to enable you to move forward in a more positive way?
I think I've always had, and partly it comes from a sort of mantra my mother always had and still has, which is, what's for you will not pass you. Or as you say in Scottish, what's for you will not go by you. It's a bit difficult for maybe your listeners to understand, but it's basically, it's being a fatalist. If it's not your time, it's not your time. What's meant to be is meant to be. So I think as I have grown in life experience and got older, and I've faced these moments of, it doesn't matter whether you knew Ayrton or not. It was, if you're a fan of the sport, it was a traumatic moment for any fan of the sport. And most people who are involved or enjoy the sport, it's one of those, I remember where I was the day the news came. I'm sure you can remember where you were. I was at Silverstone in the paddock doing a Formula 3000 bank holiday Monday race. So Sunday race day, Imola was qualifying, and I was watching on the only television that seemed to be available, which was in the Avon tyre truck when the crash happened. I don't know if you can recall, you're a bit younger than me. You were probably at school.
Well, I was at home watching with my dad. So yeah, but 100% remember it clearly.
Yeah. So moments like that, these are defining moments in your life. But I think that what I have been brought up with is the old better to have loved and lost than never loved at all. That's shocking. That's horrible. That's all the negative words we can pull. But then you still need to make the next step. You've got to keep moving forward. So some people take longer to deal with loss, and some people, it's a much quicker process. I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I think it's just how you are as an individual. And I certainly know my way is to sort of take it between the eyes and have all the emotion that everyone would have. And then it's almost like a page turning and you move forward. And then you're facing the reality of what is this new scenario? What role do I play in this new scenario? And, I would never have wanted my Grand Prix debut to come with the death of a driver, never mind Ayrton Senna. And there was no way I could replace him. But those were the decisions that were made beyond my control. Frank had a whole bunch of people he could have put in the car. But I tested loyally and, as hard as I could and as best as I could for 3 years. And he, for whatever reason, either decided it was the least controversial at the time to get over that hurdle of the trauma, or he felt, well, let's give him a shot, because he had a history of going with relatively inexperienced drivers and then seeing if they work out. He used to joke that he went to St. Joseph's College in Dumfries, which is the same school that Alan McNish, who you'll know, went to. And so although he was very English, British, he joked about his Scottish roots and how he liked a cheap deal. So he probably put me in the car because I was cheap.
Were any of those big moments, particularly the sort of tragedies that you faced, did any of them sort of change the trajectory of your life in terms of your thinking? Did you come out of any of those with a completely new mindset and therefore headed off in a different direction?
Yeah, they all have their impact in different ways. The Ayrton death and all of the controversy that followed, and I, as the test driver, had to make some submissions and make an appearance in the court in San Marino because of the prosecution case that there was a failure of the car, and the defence case, obviously using the data and science that was available to show that there was no actual evidence of a failure prior to the point of impact. You're well versed in knowing what data logging is like in Formula One and how that's evolved. The early 90s, there was a lot of data logging on the car. But so, as a young driver, I'm racing for Williams, and I'm up there being cross-examined as to, my development of that car and all that sort of thing. So, that's you're not really, you've come out of the village and you've gone racing. You're not really versed in dealing with cross-examination. So you learn from that tragedy. When the pilots were killed, that was the Tuesday before the Barcelona Grand Prix 2000, I believe. And I wasn't really keen on flying again after that Tuesday. But by Thursday, I was on Mansour Roger, the late great Mansour Roger's plane, flying to Barcelona, and about to get it back in the car, and knowing that two families' lives had been changed forever. They were fathers, they were husbands, they were sons. it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, it wasn't my time. And what that did do was make me grow. Am I allowed to swear on this, or is it just inappropriate at all times?
Absolutely.
Swearing's not cool, kids. But I was going to say it made me grow the fuck up, because I think I just turned 30, and I was living the comforts of being well paid as a Formula One driver, jumping on private planes, and all the good things that, again, because you've seen it all. You've seen the young kids come in to Formula One teams, and they've flown in by EasyJets, and they've got the lunchbox, and then 3 years later they've got all the trappings of success, and they're halfway through a seat fitting and they're rushing off to Farnborough to get back on their jet. So it's quite difficult not to change when things change around you. But I think I was getting a little bit spoiled without realizing it, and that was a massive kick up the ass to just slow down, not on the racetrack, but slow down, be a bit more aware of decisions you're making, and get rid of this I want this, so make it happen now kind of attitude, which can happen when things are becoming more, let's say, accessible or affordable. My sister, of course, that inspired me, stimulated me to want to do more for women in motorsport, with More Than Equal, W Series before that, because she didn't get the same chance that I got. And I regret that. She never gave me a hard time about it. But more often than not, this has been a male-dominated sport because of the numbers. And I think that will eventually, change. There's obviously been some inroads. But we need many more girls driving and karting. We need many more girls getting into mechanicking and engineering and all of the other science-based opportunities. And that's purely and selfishly driven out of a guilt that she didn't get the same crack at it, because all the family resource and time and energy went to me because she was 6 years younger. Yeah. And so all of these things are, and look, Gilles was a friend to many, but is one of my best buddies. Another reminder: do not settle for putting things off. Do not live in relationships that make you not feel that you can be your true self. It's so difficult, isn't it? Yeah. To make the tough decision. It's so easy to just keep meandering on, but actually the tough decisions, they give short-term pain, and whatever the freedom you get and however long your long term is, has got to be worth it.
Can I just go back to the plane crash? Because, I saw that I was at the team, I was at McLaren at that point. I hadn't been there very long, so I didn't know you, extremely well, but I do remember it happening. I knew, obviously, Andy Matthews, who was your trainer at the time, who was on the plane, I think, with you. And it was a hugely shocking moment for all of us in the team to know that had happened to, colleagues and friends. But I also, if I look back at that period of time, and I'm interested to know if that was a catalyst, it felt like around that time you shifted in terms of trying to go into even greater detail, looking for sort of opportunities to improve yourself. And I clearly remember you sort of upping your game, is the way I saw it, in terms of preparation, in terms of the sort of the levels you went to try and improve performance. Is that a fair reflection?
It's absolutely accurate. I grew up. I lay in bed that night. I got back to Monaco late that evening, because the crash was early afternoon or maybe around midday. And then and I remember, sometimes you get that kind of shiver over your body, but it's not cold, but you get that, and people might say somebody's walked over your grave, or whatever the expression is you have from where you come from. I literally had that shiver, and I went, that could have been it. Today could have been, it is no more. And I stopped the relationship with the girlfriend I had at that time, because I just didn't feel that it was right for me and her. She's very happy now, married with 2 kids.
And is that because your reflection was that up until that point you'd been sort of bumbling along just because that's the way things were?
I was just doing what had evolved out of 95 into 96. The 5 years I'd been in Formula One, it had been little learnings, and I hadn't really, I guess you could maybe say, maybe 99, I was starting to get my shoulders out a little bit more. But yeah, that was a defining moment where I just thought, right, no compromise. If something feels not right for me, then I'm going to challenge it. And if someone can explain to me why it is actually okay, and I just didn't have the education to understand it, then that's fine. But I think, again, you know this well, that the great thing in our industry, the only bad opinion is no opinion, because nothing moves. Somebody's got to make a decision with the information you've got at the moment that you're empowered to make the decision. And very often it's not the team manager, or it's not the chief mechanic. If you're faced with in your territory an issue with the car, which could mean the car's not either getting back on track in the pit stop or out when the session starts, you're empowered to make a decision. Now, an analysis afterwards may go, you made the wrong decision, but with the information you had at the time, that's what you're empowered to do, make decisions. So I think that I got a lot better at challenging and questioning and fighting for what I believed was right. And then if nobody challenged it, I guess inside I would go, oh, I must be right. Whereas I always assumed in the past, I just didn't have the knowledge or experience, and other people around me with a greater education or had been in the sport for longer must know more. But again, referencing your good self, that does not necessarily mean it's the case. Age is not always a gauge of experience. It may be in terms of years on earth, but not in terms of the ability to make a decision.
Thanks so much for getting this far through today's episode. I would love it if you could interact somehow with the Pitlane Life Lessons podcast by dropping us a like or a comment, a rating, wherever it is you're listening or watching. It really makes a massive difference. Back to the episode. You just mentioned there was a sort of mindset of no compromise from that day forward, I guess. And I, as I said, I noticed that. That was noticeable from the outside. There was a shift. It's not that you weren't going to great lengths before, but it felt like you'd gone up another level. And actually, in a world of Formula One where everyone's operating at an extremely high level, to notice that step up is something that's I found pretty impressive. So talk about the kind of things you suddenly didn't compromise on from a professional point of view in your racing career at that stage.
Time allocation. It's very easy to want to say yes to anyone asking you a question, because there might not be a very good reason to say no, other than it's going to take your time. And if you fill your time with requests for others, you can very quickly end up with no time for yourself. You mentioned Andy Matthews. He worked formerly with the British Olympic swimming team. He brought a sort of another level of knowledge and science to training. I'd never really been big into swimming actually before that, and I knew how to swim, but not to the level that I developed my swimming skills when I was with Andy. And just the whole training program, I'd go and hibernate in the mountains in my chalet in Switzerland. Didn't go home to Scotland for Christmas like I'd done previously. If Scotland wanted to come to visit me at Christmas, they were very welcome, because it was more trips on top of trips. And, instead of going to training camps, the training camps were done in the comfort of my own home, and I had the full gym and all the facilities and everything. So it was just being more time aware, and that sometimes can feel that you're being a bit more selfish, and it may be that it's more than a feeling. People can think and believe you're being a bit more selfish, but it's all eyes on the prize, and it's understanding that time passes and you might get one chance to get it right.
Yeah, and it's actually very similar. I spoke to Nico Rosberg after he won his championship in 2016. He talked about a very, very similar mindset where for that year, almost to the exclusion of all else, he had to focus on everything that was going to give him the best opportunity. And of course, that turned out to work out really well for him in the end, but he couldn't dedicate that same level of dedication forevermore. It was a one and done. That's why he ended up retiring. So I completely get that. Did you see the results changing with these, in terms of your own performance and how you were feeling about what you were doing? Did you see positive changes as a result of this?
Yeah, I think that my performance profile definitely improved. My physical, I was reasonably fit, because I'd always trained, but I was amazed to find that you can keep doing more. It's amazing how much more you can actually do, as long as you tally it up with the right, nutrition and the right amount of rest. That's the big thing as well. The rest element is so important. And, I was having this conversation the other day, actually. It got to the point where with Andy, we knew exactly the nutrients that I needed to push especially in the off season, but also during the season. And, I'd wake up at, I can't remember if it was like 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. to have a pre-made shake to make sure that the nutrition was still going into the muscles for recovery, rather than having 8 hours or 9 hours, however long I was in bed, where the body goes through whatever cycle it goes through. So that probably seems a bit extreme, but I bought into it, believed in it, and I felt I could see the difference. And I think it just gives you an overall confidence and a focus to how you turn up at the track and who are you spending your time with and all of those good things. Being in a motorhome, I was one of the first, along with Jacques Villeneuve, to have a motorhome of the, let's say, the modern drivers of that era. I think probably go back to the 70s and 80s, they might have done, but everyone got out of the way of it. But you remember, I'd have my motorhome at the test track because we did a lot of testing, and it would move between Barcelona, Jerez, Ricard, whatever we were testing. And it would mean that I had home from home. I had my training facilities there. I had my own music. It was just about trying to remove as many external distractions as possible, because simple thing like checking into a hotel, especially when you're a little bit in the public eye, the manager wants to come and welcome you because, of course, that makes your stay so much better if somebody says welcome. Checking in, checking out, paying the bill. There's all of these things are just distractions. They don't actually make your ability to perform any better. So I removed as many of those as I possibly could.
Yeah, and that level of detail that you're talking about there, I'm going to tell you a very quick anecdote that from my side that you won't remember, but I extended to how you tried to embrace the team and to get the team behind you, which clearly is a very important part of Formula One. My first ever test at McLaren, when I turned up as this young, fresh-faced kid, not knowing anybody or anything. And I remember at the end of my first day working on the cars, going over to the motorhome in the paddock where we used to eat dinner. And the tables are all full. The people that I've been working with all day, who I still didn't really know, were on a full table. So I sat on a table on my own, and I waited there for a few minutes, and one person came over to sit with me, and it was you. And I remember, because of course, I'm a starry-eyed kid at that point. Yeah. You're this superstar I've been watching on telly for years, by the way, up until that point. So I was a little bit starstruck even, and you came over and you sat down, and we had a conversation, which was a brilliant conversation. But I asked you halfway through that chat, I said, why did you come and sit next to me? Because all your engineers are over there, all your mechanics that you know are there. You could have sat anywhere with people you know. And you said to me, the reason I've come and sat next to you is because I don't know you. And you said, it's really important that I get to know my team and that you get to know me. And it's always stuck with me. I put it in my book, which you very kindly wrote the foreword to. It was a really important moment for me because it changed the way that I thought about team and clearly made me understand how important you felt the idea of team was.
Yeah, I've always loved being part of a team. And when asked, do I miss Formula One in terms of driving? Of course, it's amazing to drive a Grand Prix car, to come out of La Source and build the speed towards Eau Rouge and have that tingle of, is it flat, is it not flat? All the good things that go where you're trusting engineers and science and believing in yourself. That's a wonderful feeling and a joy. But actually, the thing I miss more is that collaboration of team, because every single person who's on the test team plays a role. Whatever that role is, it's all focused on performance. And that performance as a driver, you're at the sort of the final, you're the end user of all of those efforts. And you'll remember well, testing in those days was brutal. You guys soaked it up. Yeah, I'd come in the morning from my motorhome about 100 meters away. I didn't have to commute back to the hotel, which if you were lucky in Jerez, it might be 5 kilometers away or something. But in a lot of places, it was probably 20 minutes, half an hour out of each day just commuting. And I'd go, what time was it last night? And very regularly, it would be like 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. Yeah. And they would do it, or you would do it day after day after day. Health and safety would have a field day, but actually, before health and safety got anywhere near something like that, there's only a small percentage of the public are wired that way with that level of commitment And, I'm proudly British. Obviously, I'm from the northern part of the island. But I think that as Brits, we often don't sing our own praises enough for our work ethic. Not everybody, of course, but those that get it, get it. And it's not a question of what's the working day. It's what do we need to do today? And we all know when the work's done.
Yeah, and we've all been privileged to grow up in a world of Formula One, especially where there's probably a disproportionate number of people with that level of work ethic and with that level of dedication. You're right. So when you're surrounded by that all day, every day, it rubs off on you, and everyone tends to raise their game. In terms of outside of Formula One and the people listening or watching this podcast, I'm a firm believer that those things you've described, that going to the extra level of detail, taking care of all of these little things that seem tiny on their own, but can play a role in giving you an advantage. In the real world, I'm a big believer that the bar is actually set relatively low, in that if you want to create an opportunity or an advantage for yourself, you don't really need to go to that greater level to be able to do it. It's just that actually most people don't. In Formula One, what you're describing is working in an elite environment. So to create the advantage, you're having to go to almost extreme lengths. Do you understand what I'm saying there in terms of whether it's the next generation, our kids or whatever else, in the real world, people can find opportunity or can create advantage with just a very small element of what you're talking about?
I believe so. Again, I'm still here making opportunities happen in areas that I've got no experience or knowledge, and motor racing gave me that confidence. In the case of Whisper, which is an investment I have with Jake Humphreys, Sunil Patel. Jake was a presenter for the BBC. Sunil was a producer with BBC, and I know nothing about television, but yet they have grown that business. But I didn't know how to design or build a Formula One car, but I could play a role within that industry. So I think that's one of the takeaways. You don't have to know about an industry to play a role within that industry. And so I think that sometimes we get overwhelmed by looking at the bigger picture. Like, how does government work? Oh my God, it must be so. Well, it works by groups of people coming together and being empowered and hopefully making good decisions, which is a whole other questionable part of whether the government does that. But if you break it down into one person can only do one task at a time, unless they're particularly good at multitasking, or a more simple way of describing an individual, like Mark Webber uses the expression, to know what it is to be in someone else's shoes. You've got to walk a mile in their shoes. You've got to one step at a time discover who they are. So I think if we break things down, there are opportunities. I tell my 16-year-old who's about to go into GB4 racing in the UK, just everything matters. How you prepare to go to bed at night, your last thoughts consciously before you go to sleep, planning for the next day, how you prepare your bag, packing, how you get to the airport. Everything matters. No one's getting an award for packing their bag or brushing their teeth. But why not just do it as best you can? And then everything just becomes so much more satisfying and so much easier and so much more predictable. It's the haphazard approach to life, which, that kind of scatty brain. I have difficulty concentrating on any individual thing for a particularly long period of time, which is where speed was brilliant for me, because above 100 miles an hour, you have to pretty much focus. So I get it when people are distracted, but you can break things down into smaller tasks and then suddenly become a much more effective individual. And here's the thing, within a team, become a really good team player.
Yeah, it's so true. And that idea of, I often see it phrased as how you do anything is how you do everything, which is, I guess, the same thing you're referring to. How's your 16-year-old son responded to that? I mean, I imagine if he's in the world of motor racing, he's around a similar environment, so he's got a real sense of focus. But has he responded well to that kind of advice?
Really interesting. My first time being a dad. So anyone who's got multiple kids and who's older than, or maybe even younger than me, I was 37 when Dayton was born. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? With kids, he appears to listen to others much more than he would listen to me. Yeah. I don't think that's unique. But I've tried to lay out everything to give him the best opportunity, and then to his hands on the steering wheel. I can only do so much, and then it's down to him. So I think a lot of it, I hear him repeat certain things to others when I'm slightly out of eye line, and I go, yeah, he picked that up. And then other things, I'll be like, geez, I've said it 100 times. Is it the 101 that's going to make the difference? So we'll find out. We'll find out this year. He's doing Jonathan Palmer's GB4 championship. I think it looks like a really nice championship. He's tested the cars a few times, looks comfortable in cars. Again, as we both know, what feels like a great car, the minute somebody goes half a tenth quicker, it becomes the worst car you've ever driven if you can't find that other half tenth. So you can only judge when they're actually in racing. That's when you find out.
Yeah, and as you well know, the talent is one part of it, but a very large part, maybe even the biggest part, is how you handle those kind of the ups and downs, the disappointments when you do find yourself a couple of tenths down. How do you sort of wallow in self-pity, or do you dig in and find a way? And I guess a lot of what you've referred to as looking for opportunity and having no compromise taps into that side. I mean, do I remember rightly you had a mindset coach way back in the 2000s? I seem to think you were one of the first to do that. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a desire to leave no stone unturned. Why would I be embarrassed or shy to reach out to those who've got better understanding of how the human brain functions and operates? Could they find what is the sweet spot? What enabled me to be on pole position in Monaco when I was never a great qualifier? So on that particular day, either the other 19 or 23 drivers, however many there was, decided not to turn up, or I pulled it all together. And, on several other occasions when those things happened. So I feel that the exceptional drivers have a consistency to their performance. I don't particularly think, and again, this is an opinion, so it's not something that anyone needs to get angry about, but I don't particularly think that, Michael or Lewis or Mika were much quicker than each other, or one was the quickest. We were all capable of, even whoever the teammate is, can occasionally match whoever their quick world championship teammate is. But they just do it so consistently. They do it more often than not, week in, week out. Whereas anyone who's in Formula One, they're all good in Formula One, but we're looking for great, we're looking for exceptional, and that's the same in any sport. Why is Messi revered, or Ronaldo? Probably not so much now, but in their younger career, because they just have a consistency over other great strikers.
And I think, when you talked about this idea of the way you do anything is the way you do everything, I think that taps into the same thing, right? So the consistency message is exactly that, isn't it? If you pack your bag really well, if you make sure you're prepared the night before, whether it's school or whatever, you're much more likely to be in that kind of frame of mind to do everything at a very high level. And that's the consistency you're talking about.
Yeah, actually, what I should do maybe at this point, because you will remember, but it was Dr. Kerry Spackman, who worked for McLaren for a period of time. I'd worked with him at Paul Stewart Racing, actually, way back, long before I went anywhere near McLaren, he'd studied neuroscience. And actually, through that experience of coming to tests with me and working with McLaren back at base, he brought out a book called The Winning Formula, which is The Winning Formula. That's my book.
I was just going to say, the same name as yours.
The Winner's Bible. Oh, sorry, I'm getting too many winners confused in mind here. So Dr. Kerry Spackman, The Winner's Bible, he lives back in New Zealand now, and he does some, I'm going to say hobby racing. If he's listening to this, he may be offended by that, but let's say he's not a paid professional, but well worth anyone looking him up, because great understanding of athletes in other sports, and then motor racing, particularly using his experience there.
Just to bring this back to the modern day, leaving your Formula One career as a driver behind, you've now moved into a world where you're pretty prolific in the business sense in many aspects. As you touched on earlier, you've built, together with Jake and Sunil, Whisper Films, massively successful production company, together with a number of other businesses, from the hotel industry to events. There's lots of things you're now involved with. Are all of these things that you've talked about so far in our conversation, are they still things that you absolutely put at the very highest priority in the business world as well?
Well, again, it's about working with more talented people than myself. So I learned that through the business of motor racing, that if you surround yourself with talented, capable people, then we all have our different skills. And I think that's that confidence to realize that we can fit in anywhere, we can contribute. You know, when I was younger, I lacked the confidence to really know where did I fit in. You know, I was the classic say nothing. So, you know, run the risk. And it was a Ron Dennis quote. He would say, better to say nothing and let people think you're stupid than to open your mouth and confirm that you are. Yeah. So, I just didn't know a lot when I was younger, so I didn't say a lot. And then it's not that I know a lot more now, that I say a lot more, but I just have a greater level of world travel and understanding to feel confident to contribute to the conversation, not to dominate it by talking longer and louder, but to engage and to learn. And that's one of the things I've loved about being involved in different businesses, is the opportunity to work with different people and to give them maybe the confidence that they can grow within that business that they maybe didn't have. And I wouldn't necessarily know they don't, but maybe they have that little keep my mouth shut, and, you know, for fear of somebody thinking I don't know my job, to say, I believe that you're the right person right now. How can we make this better? How can we win this contract? And, there's been, Sunil has been an absolute, I think, star at going from no previous experience of running a business to being CEO of a company that employs well over 300 people. We have major contracts with major sports franchises around the world, and it continues to grow. And we share a common vision that we want to be the best, and in being the best, that will see growth, and therefore, I guess, would lead to being the biggest. Not from a being a sizes type person, or biggest is best, but we want to grow because it means we are engaging with more and more team members, and more team members will benefit from being part of the journey as well.
Well, all three of you in that Whisper Films business have come, at least, through Formula One. You in the sense that we all know, but the other two in different forms, from a TV production point of view and a presenting when it comes to Jake. I said earlier, you wrote the foreword to my first book very kindly. Jake Humphrey's just written the foreword to my second book. And he mentions that there was a moment when the three of you first got together in building this organisation, that your viewpoint kind of struck a chord with him and changed the way he thought, which was really when you came to, I think it was a production meeting post one of your Channel 4 productions, when you talked about the things that had gone wrong as opposed to the things that everyone else seemed to be celebrating after a production or a show went really well. And that surely comes from your Formula One, the debriefs that we all go through. It really is about trying to understand where we can improve at all times. And you clearly still carry that forward, right?
I think what you find in a lot of businesses and in life, everyone's there for the party when things are going well. You really find out who your friends are when things get smelly. And I think through the industry that we've grown up through, you're constantly looking for what was the mistakes, or what was could have been a major failure, because they're your biggest sources of opportunity, because it's very difficult to improve on the perfect, whatever it happens to be. But whatever the perfect thing is, competition will see that be bettered at some point. But in the context of that Grand Prix, when the checker flag's gone, rather than, or the production is finished, rather than going, hey, we won the race, let's pack up and go and have beers at the bar. It's like, right, again, this is so part of the world you've grown up in. It's, right, did the driver stop 2 centimetres to the left at the pit stop? that meant everybody had to move a little bit. It's those tiny little details that add up to the bigger picture. So criticizing is one of the most difficult things to do, because it's very difficult for a criticism not to be personal. But the wonderful thing about a sports team is everybody's focused on one goal, which is winning, and therefore somebody shouting "run faster" or "do this better" actually is taken in the manner it's intended, which is to improve the team. It's not taken as a personal insult.
Yeah, and one of the major factors in allowing that to work is removing the element of ego, isn't it? Either on a personal level or from the group, because ego is the one thing that gets in the way of that being a positive, constructive force.
Yeah, absolutely.
Listen, David, I know you've got to go. You are a busy man, and I massively appreciate you spending the time and sharing some of your wisdom. It was a wonderful time for me to be a teammate of yours back in our days at McLaren. I learned a lot back then. I'm sure that our listeners and viewers will have learnt a lot today. So thank you so much, and I will look forward to catch up with you again soon.
No, absolutely great to chat to you. Love seeing how your career's developed. So, we'll continue to cross paths.
No doubt. Thanks, mate.
All the best.
Well, what an inspirational character. I've learnt so much from David over the years. I'm proud to be able to call him a friend and a colleague, and I hope you learnt a lot from that conversation too. So many small details. This particular idea of treating everything the way you treat anything, I think, is a mindset shift that Formula One encourages us all to have, and if you can just take a small part of that, I have no doubt it can lead on to greater success. Before I see you again, try and remember this in whatever it is you're doing. Do the right things, do the things right.